Welcome to the podcast where we dive deep into one of the most fascinating parts of Christian history, a gospel that some say rewrites the whole story, in the most radical way.
I'm excited to dig into it. So we're talking about a gospel that many hold as the most intimate portrait of Jesus, but it might not be what it seems, right?
Exactly, yeah. Millions believe the Gospel of John gives us this profound spiritual view of Jesus, yet when you really look at it, it presents a Jesus quite different from the one we find in the Synoptics. It's like,
Yep,
imagine a narrative where Jesus isn't, born of a virgin, doesn't baptize anyone, and works miracles primarily to prove divine identity rather than out of compassion.
wow, that's an entirely different spin, almost like rewriting history. So what does that do for our understanding of Jesus?
It, transforms him from a humble, empathetic teacher into a kind of cosmic being, more like a divine philosopher than a mere human prophet. And it's interesting because the style and vocabulary, of this gospel is steeped in Greek philosophy.
Right, that opening with "in the beginning was the Word" is so unlike the Jewish narrative we expect from earlier texts.
Yeah, that phrase isn't really typical of Jewish literature. It's very Greek, influenced by the logos concept, like the
Yes,
ideas from Philo of Alexandria. It's like the gospel is borrowing from Greek metaphysics to set up a divine framework for who Jesus is.
that's such a creative, yet controversial approach. Which brings us to when it was actually written, right?
Absolutely. Most scholars date it somewhere between 90 and 110 CE, which is like at least 60 years after Jesus' death. This
Indeed.
gap makes it a subject of debate. Was it penned by an eyewitness or by someone from a later community?
And figures like Raymond Brown suggest that it's the most theologically developed Gospels, while Bart Ehrman is more skeptical about its authorship.
Exactly. And that's where we hit the debate about authorship. The church tradition claims it was written by John, the son of Zebedee, but the text never actually names its author. Instead, it refers to the disciple whom Jesus
Right, I see.
loved. Some scholars even suggest that this figure may be more symbolic than historical.
So you're saying it might have been a literary tool to give the Gospel authority rather than an unbroken eyewitness account?
Yep, precisely. Scholars like Raymond Brown and D. Moody Smith argue that the beloved disciple might not even be one real person, but a symbol to
Uh-huh.
anchor the text's authority. Then you also have Rudolf Bultmann's theory. He thought the gospel was layered, an early narrative with later additions of speeches and miracles.
That layered narrative is so interesting. I mean, if you think about it, it's almost like editing a movie over time, isn't it? Adding scenes, refining the narrative.
Exactly. It's like a filmmaker coming back to reshoot the ending to better convey a cosmic truth. And because of that process,
I can
the
see that.
portrayal of Jesus shifts from a simple human prophet to a pre-existent divine entity.
That really elevates the stakes, doesn't it? Instead of a man of the people, he's cast as a being who exists beyond time and space.
Exactly. Getting to that, the gospel is also known as the gospel of faith rather than history. It focuses less on historical events like the Last Supper or exorcisms and instead on metaphysical debates and cosmic identity.
But don't you think that kind of portrayal might alienate those who look for a more relatable human Jesus in Scripture?
That's a great point.
Yeah.
In fact, this shift may have contributed to the early church's struggles with the text. Irenaeus, for example, noted that early followers actually resisted John's gospel initially because it was too strange and mystical.
It sounds like, in effect, this gospel, while enriching the theological debate, ended up watering down some of the historical grounding of Jesus' life.
Precisely. And that leads us to the matter of the Johannine community. Scholars suggest that the gospel emerged from a breakaway Jewish Christian sect, one that was actually expelled from the synagogue after the Jewish War. This community saw Jesus not so much as a political liberator, but as the eternal Logos, the very mind of God.
That context, then, really colors the narrative with a sense of division. Us versus them, light versus darkness, and lots of symbolic language.
Right. And this usage of terms like the Spirit of Truth or the Water of Life even echoes language found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. It makes you
Okay.
wonder if there's a bit of Essene influence mixed in there. Raymond Brown, for instance, proposed that there might be a connection between John's community and the Essenes of Qumran.
That kind of dualistic, almost apocalyptic outlook really sets John's narrative apart from the synoptics, which are, more grounded in day-to-day events and relationships.
Yep, exactly. And then there's the intriguing overlap with early Gnostic texts, like the Gospel of Thomas or the Apocryphon of John.
That's right.
Some scholars suggest John's mystical tone could have been a bridge between early Orthodoxy and Gnosticism, even if later on editors tried to clean up overtly Gnostic elements.
So, on one hand, it's a very high-minded philosophical take on the divine. And on the other, it has this raw, almost experimental tone in its redactions. It's like a theological laboratory, testing out ideas.
Exactly. And that brings us to the battle over the nature of Jesus himself, a debate that became fierce in the mid-2nd century. Figures like Marcion and Valentinus used John as evidence that Jesus was a divine spirit, while Orthodox bishops claimed the same text to argue for his deep humanity.
That's definitely a battleground.
This centennial war of ideas around the Word became flesh is a real historical tug-of-war.
It's almost like each faction saw the same line as proof of their own beliefs, which is both fascinating and, well, a bit ironic.
Indeed. And that duality is what makes John's Gospel so compelling even today. Its modern relevance, in a way, comes from its radical departure from the other narratives. It transformed Christianity from an apocalyptic movement into a religion of mystical faith. It reshaped
Yeah,
the
I
entire
really see
religious
that point.
landscape.
And this really poses a provocative question. If John's Gospel pushed a paradigm shift from a distinctly Jewish messianic figure to a cosmic, almost Greek deification of Jesus, what are we really left to believe about his origins?
Exactly. It challenges traditional convictions. If the Gospel was shaped by a fringe community, or even edited later by proto-Orthodox redactors, then the Jesus we commonly know might in some respects be more reflective of, Greek philosophy than of the original Jewish context.
That's a huge shift to consider. That's definitely a point to chew on. It also makes you wonder what other texts might have shifted dramatically in their interpretation over time in similar ways.
Absolutely. John's Gospel is a clear example of how complex the process of religious evolution can be. Layers of editing, symbolic language, and conflicting ideologies all come together to form a text that's, well, both historically ambiguous and deeply theologically rich.
Yeah, exactly. And that really makes it a living document in terms of ongoing debate, doesn't it? I mean, centuries later, we're still discussing the identity and nature of Jesus through this text.
It sure does. It's like every time you peel back one layer, you find another question staring right back at you. Questions about faith, history, and the very nature of divinity.
Right, I get that. But, let me respectfully challenge one point here. If John's Gospel is so different and seemingly edited over time, doesn't that undercut its authority as a historical document?
That's a valid critique. And honestly, many would argue exactly that.
Yeah,
But
that's fair.
on the flip side, its authority may not always lie in historical fact as much as in its power to shape belief. It's, less about making a historical record and more about offering a new theological vision of who Jesus is.
I see what you mean. Its influence can be seen in how Christianity evolved, regardless of its historical veracity.
Precisely. And when we step back, we see that the Gospel of John has, in many ways, paved the way for a broader, if more abstract, understanding of divinity, a departure from the strictly historical into the realm of spiritual myth-making.
So, in a nutshell, we're looking at a document that not only redefines Jesus, but also redefines, well, what religion could be, a blend of history, myth, and radical new ideas.
Right on. And its modern relevance is still burning strong. It invites us to question how narrative and theology intermingle and how faith evolves long after the events it describes.
Absolutely.
It's a reminder that religious texts are living entities, constantly reinterpreted by every generation.
That was a super engaging, deep dive into a text that's as much about faith as it is about the messy human process of creation and editing.
Exactly. And it's one of those topics that keeps scholars and believers talking. Thanks for sticking with this wild journey through the Gospel of John.
Yeah. I know I'll be thinking about this remix of history and philosophy for a long time. Thanks for such an eye-opening conversation.
Thanks for joining in the exploration. Till next time, keep questioning and keep discovering.